All right, Brian, we're going to finish things off today with a discussion on the college football playoff rankings. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Saturday that was, if you will. And look, 7 of the top 20 teams ranked in the college football playoff rankings lost yesterday. They lost. So, I mean, we're talking about some pretty major shakeups here, and this is the biggest, I think, shakeup so far in these rankings. Like, what is the committee going to do with certain teams, and what is that going to look like? And we're 2 weeks away from the final rankings, and so this is going to shape a lot of how we are going to know what the committee is thinking.
So I said something. I think it was our Thursday show. I made a joke that there weren't a lot of marquee games on and not a lot of ranked versus ranked matchups, which meant there were going to be some crazy upsets because every time we've seen that, and there hasn't been a whole lot of weeks of that, but in the past when we've had weeks where there just weren't a lot of great games on, we get Vanderbilt beating Alabama. And there was always like a couple games that would happen like that. It was like it wasn't just that game, it was also yes, Bama got beat, but then also this other crazy thing happened that day. You know what I mean? And it just was like, it was just one of those things where like when it rains, it pours kind of thing.
Yeah, it did too, man.
Yeah. And so you see these things, Vince, and you're just like, boy, this is just why I would not want to, I would not want to be one of those teams. But I'm thinking like, okay, maybe a game will happen. Maybe there'll be like one upset. I did not see coming all the different upsets that we saw coming. It's like there was this week where you had number 1 Bama was playing unranked Vanderbilt, Ohio State was playing unranked Iowa, Tennessee was playing unranked Arkansas, Georgia was playing unranked Auburn, Miami was playing unranked Cal, Michigan was playing unranked Washington, USC was number 11, Michigan was 10, USC was 11. They were playing unranked Minnesota. And you just look at all these games and you're just like, not a great slate of games. Louisville was playing unranked SMU. And Vanderbilt won, Arkansas won, Washington won, Minnesota won, and Louisville or SMU won. And then Miami gets gifted a play late in the game that otherwise they would have won. We've seen these kind of crazy weekends, but even with knowing that, I did not see coming what happened this weekend. I did not see Ole Miss losing to Florida and Alabama. Like the Ole Miss losing to Florida, we actually mentioned that game in the Thursday preview because I was like, I really want to see how this is going to go, with the way Florida's playing. And does Ole Miss kind of do their Ole Miss thing of just decide we're not going to show up this week? Vince, Bama losing to Oklahoma was so far off my radar. I thought there was a better chance that Army was going to beat Notre Dame than Oklahoma was going to beat Alabama.
And you said as much. I remember very specifically, and I don't know if it was the Thursday show that I was cutting up, or if it was a show that you and I did together or whatever.
It might have just been us talking.
It might have been
no way.
We were talking about potential upsets, and we're kind of going through the list, and you're like, yeah, that's not happening.
No way, Oklahoma. And now they beat them, they destroyed them.
Yeah,
I mean they just whooped them from start to finish.
Yes.
That game
was never a game. It was never a game. It just wasn't. So that was ugly.
I was worried about A&M and Auburn. I was. It's just the typical looking ahead game. But man, I did not see all of them happening. That was the wild thing, Vince. It's like, could I have seen Minnesota giving Penn State a game? Yes. Could I have seen, Florida beating Ole Miss? Maybe. But it's possible. Could I have seen Arizona State beating BYU? Of course. Could I have seen Auburn upsetting A&M? Of course. I picked Kansas to beat Colorado, so of course I expected that. But to see all of them happen, and that's what got me a little nervous before the Notre Dame game because I'm like, first of all, with the week I was having, is like this is just gonna be the perfect ending to my week of just the worst week of my life. You know what I mean? Or worst month of my life. Let's just end it this way with Notre Dame freaking losing to Army. And so I mean, you watch all these games and you're just like, dude, if Ole Miss can lose to Florida and the Oklahoma game was not even happening yet, right? Wasn't that a later game, or was that happening?
That was during.
It was a 7:30 game or whatever, 7 o'clock.
It was during the Notre Dame game, I believe.
Right. That one hadn't even happened yet. The A&M game hadn't even happened yet, and I was already nervous. And I'm watching UMass run the ball down Georgia's throat in the first half of that game, and I'm like, Goose, I am not feeling as good about tonight as I thought I was going to. And then to see Notre Dame do what they did, but dude, it was and not just the games that were lost, but like Penn State almost losing to Minnesota, like they did
Probably
not
should
control
have.
the game. Yeah,
Probably should
did
have.
not control the game at all, man. Like they were outplayed in a lot of ways. It was just it was a wild weekend.
Yes,
Really
it was. Yes, it was. So, we can talk about how this whole thing affected Notre Dame. You want us to start off with that?
We can do whatever you want to do, buddy.
Okay.
Well, and by the way, this weekend changed the one of the metrics that they use for the playoff committee is game control.
Okay.
And Notre Dame was 13th, I think, last week, and they moved up to 6th.
Oh, wow.
After that, and I still don't have a clue how Alabama's ahead of them, but
in game control, they've lost 3 games.
And in 2 of those games they lost, they literally trailed the entire game. They never led Vanderbilt, and I think they only led Oklahoma 3-0. So I do not and Notre Dame's blown more teams out, so I don't quite understand how that works. But Notre Dame is 6th. I think they were 13th last week. So it was a major shakeup, Vince. Major shakeup.
Man, you're not kidding.
Yep.
So, I mean, okay, so how things affect Notre Dame, right? We can talk about the teams ahead of them that lost, or team ahead of them that lost, and that would have been IU. So they're going to fall. How do you see that one playing out? We'll just kind of go down the line here.
Yeah, I mean, well, it's kind of hard to go individually because they all impact each other. But in relationship to Notre Dame, I certainly see Indiana falling behind Notre Dame.
Agreed.
Now, the counter could be, well, are they going to fall? I mean, Penn State is ahead of Notre Dame, and they lost to Ohio State at home. Much more competitive game. And as much as I think Penn State's got a schedule that's kind of soft, and it's still tougher than Indiana's. And
Agreed.
Penn State's Penn State, and we've seen these committee members give sort of
they love Penn
bonuses.
State.
Well, and not just Penn State. I mean, they love the power teams. They love the traditional blue bloods. That's who they're going to give the benefit of the doubt to. And when you look at Penn State, again, their schedule is not tough. It's not. It hasn't been a real brutal schedule, but it hasn't been a joke of a schedule either. I mean, West Virginia 6-5. Bowling Green is, I think, 7-4. They've won 5 in a row. Their losses were to Penn State, Texas A&M, Northern Illinois, and Old Dominion. So only one of those was a bad loss. They lost to A&M by 6 and Penn State by 7. They beat Illinois, who's 8-3 and ranked. They beat USC, who's 6-5. They beat Wisconsin, who's 5-6. Washington, who's 6-5. And then, of course, they beat Minnesota. So, not a real tough schedule, but it's also not like 2 teams above 500 like that Indiana plays, it's just a worse schedule. Imagine how bad your schedule is when that's a more competitive, a much tougher schedule than yours. So I just think it's that those 2 things is going to drop them behind Notre Dame. Because at least Penn State can hang their hat on, hey, we played Ohio State tough and we beat Illinois. Like what's Indiana hanging their resume on? We just killed everybody?
Yes.
I mean,
that is what they are.
Notre Dame can do that, but they can do that against better teams, against better opponents, and that's why I don't think that they're going to be ahead. So I think Indiana falls behind. I do think with how everything played out this week, that Indiana will still be in the playoff.
I do too.
If it ends today.
But they're going to be down in an area that is dangerous.
Yes. To where you better go out next weekend and absolutely annihilate Purdue.
Kind of that 9, 10, 11 range, I think, is where they're going to end up,
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I personally have them at 10. But I mean, I think that 9 to 11 range is appropriate for them.
I think if this weekend would have held, if the ranked teams would have held serve this week, I think Indiana would have got knocked out.
Yes, because they're not going to put them ahead of those SEC teams.
Not with a dominating loss,
right?
Where
they're
they got
not
whipped.
Do that.
Yeah, there was no way they're going to have them ahead of Alabama. No way we're going to have them ahead of Ole Miss. Maybe Tennessee. Maybe.
That's a hard
But being ahead of Tennessee still might knock you out, depending on how some other teams finish the season. So they caught a huge break this weekend with the chaos that was the SEC this weekend, which may not be done because Tennessee playing Vanderbilt next weekend is going to get really interesting.
Absolutely.
Really interesting for them because the chaos and it's at Vanderbilt.
Mm-hmm.
And Vanderbilt's been pretty tough at home this year. You know, they beat Virginia Tech at home, they beat Alabama at home, they beat Ball State at home, and they lost to South Carolina and Texas at home. All right, those are pretty hot teams, and Texas was a competitive game. And this past weekend, they battled LSU at LSU for 4 quarters. So that's going to be an interesting game. So there's going to be a lot more. There could be some more chaos lurking, Vince. But I think Indiana, as of right now, is in. I do think they need to bounce back with incredible vengeance against Purdue this weekend.
Oh, yeah. And Purdue's a great opponent to
yes, they are.
To receive that vengeance.
You know what? I say this about Purdue, dude. They don't quit. They're just terrible. I watched the Michigan State game. They're down 24-3, and they just kept battling. And ended up making a 24-17 game. They threw a pick late in the game. They were driving. They're just awful. I mean, he's done such a bad job with that football team. But they I'll give him credit. Watching them against Michigan State, this team is still competing, but they are awful. They're just awful. They're way worse than I thought he's done such a bad job with that team. But anyway, I think Indiana's a team. I think they'll still be in at 11-1. They were 10-1 going into this last week.
So let's talk about the 2 SEC teams that lost, the significant SEC teams that lost, right? So, you know, Alabama, Ole Miss. What do you think the committee is going to do with those 2 teams? Because they were creeping up, and now they got that 3rd loss. Where do you think that puts them?
I think Ole Miss falls way down.
Okay.
And there's 2 reasons why I think Ole Miss falls way down. Number one is they are Ole Miss. They're not a blue blood. They're an SEC team, but they're not a blue blood. And I don't think those things matter. Just so people understand, I don't think that matters, but I think it does to the committee. But the other part of it too, Vince, is when you look at their resume, they have a very weird resume. And because they've got the real big win, right? They got the win over Georgia, which is a great win. Okay. But in the first ranking, Ole Miss was 16th in that ranking and was getting ready to play Georgia. So clearly they didn't think much of their resume at the time. And the thing that's hurt Ole Miss is because they don't have a lot of great wins that I think are needle movers, because I don't think South Carolina is getting in the respect they should for how well they're playing right now. Now, maybe that changes because they did beat South Carolina. And of course, the Georgia win is big. But what hurts that is your 3 losses are bad losses. Like really bad losses. Your best loss is to 7-4 LSU, who just broke a 3-game losing streak. You lost to a Florida team that's 6-5, and you lost to a Kentucky team who is currently 4-7. Like, they're not good, and their wins are over Murray State, Ohio, Southern Miss, and Ole Miss. Like, they're the only competent team that they've beat all year was you. They have really bad losses. Here's the thing about Alabama, though, Vince. Alabama has the Georgia win also. But, and then when you look at Alabama's resume, they beat Missouri, who's still ranked, and they beat South Carolina, who's ranked. So they actually have one more top 25 win. They both beat Georgia, although Ole Miss beat them more convincing. Actually, Ole Miss beat both of those teams more convincingly. But they have that win over Missouri. What I think changes a little bit is you had the loss to Tennessee last week. And so the Vanderbilt game was looking like a bit of a fluke. Tennessee's a really good team. You lost to them on the road. Vanderbilt's a fluke. Well, now you've lost to 2 6-5 football teams. Right? So everybody, Northern Illinois sucks. They suck. Okay. All right. They're a 6-5 MAC team. Well, you've lost to 2 6-5 teams from your conference that aren't very good either. And at some point in time, and including a Vanderbilt team who lost to Georgia State, by the way, who's like 2-9. And then, Oklahoma's just gotten blown out by people a big chunk this year. I mean, Oklahoma's wins this year. They beat Temple, who stinks, Houston, who stinks, Auburn, who stinks, Tulane, who's pretty good, Maine, and now Bama. Like, how much is Bama going to get banged for having 2 bad losses on top of getting outplayed by Tennessee? I mean, Vince, they didn't just lose on Saturday. They got whipped by Oklahoma. That's what I think kind of Like Ole Miss went toe to toe and had chances to beat Florida. Alabama was not in that game from the second quarter on. I don't see how you can put a 3-loss team with 2 losses to 6-5 teams who just got beat by 3 touchdowns by a team that was 5-5. I don't see how you can put a team like that in the playoff. I don't. I think there's a chance they could still be in at the end, because I don't think. I mean, at some point in time, you're kind of like, okay, well, you're going to put in a second ACC team. I think they should, but I don't think they want to. I mean,
Yeah.
I think I think the biggest winner this weekend, Vince, along these lines, was the ACC.
Because now they're looking like, if you look at a lot of people's projections, the ACC is getting in SMU and Miami both.
You can't leave though if they face against each other 11-1. You can't keep one of them out.
Right. And Clemson's knocking on the door. Clemson's knocking on the door.
Especially since, well, the only way Clemson gets in is if they win the SEC championship, in my opinion. Because I think if they lose ACC, that would give them a 3rd loss, and I don't know that they'll get the benefit of the doubt that the SEC teams get with 3 losses. I don't think that's fair, but I think that's the reality of it.
I'm interested to see where they rank Clemson this week, because
me too.
Everybody's very high on South Carolina right now and what they're able to do. Now, South Carolina's not going to be in the SEC championship, so I think they're going to have a really hard time getting into the playoff. There's just too many teams ahead of them, in my opinion.
Where they're ranked this week,
where they're ranked,
huge impact on
that, exactly.
Well, and the problem
where Clemson's ranked too, because you're going to look at a top whatever matchup there, and the winner's going to get something for them.
Everybody keeps talking about, because last week Clemson was 1 spot ahead of South Carolina. Everybody goes, South Carolina's hot and they are going to jump up. And I'm like, based on what? This isn't a who's played well the last 2 weeks ranking.
Right.
This is an entire season. And how do you put a 3-loss South Carolina team over a 3-loss Ole Miss team and a 3-loss Bama team who both beat them?
Right, exactly.
And Ole Miss beat them convincingly. So I just don't know that South Carolina is going to be the team that jumps up, Vince. And
I agree.
That's the thing. So, man, this whole thing is just getting really, really wonky at this point in time. And so I think right now, barring Penn State getting beat by Maryland, or Ohio State losing to Michigan, I don't see how the Big Ten's not going to have 4 now. So I think that's pretty much a done deal. I think Notre Dame is in as long as they beat USC. I think that obviously you're going to have an ACC team in there. I think you're going to now have a second ACC team in there. I think Boise's going to be in there as long as they win.
Well,
that's 8 teams, and then you're going to have a second SEC team. So you're going to have 2 SEC teams. So you start looking at it right now, Vince. You're talking about 4, 6, 8. You're talking about 10 spots right there already taken. There's 2 more at-larges. And you start saying, okay, well, who gets those final 2? I mean, to your point, does a 3rd SEC team jump up in there?
ACC, you mean? Or
ACC team, ACC. Yes, jump in there. You know, like you said, if what would it? I don't know if that's possible, because it would require, I think, one of those 2 to lose this weekend. I think the only chance they have is if Miami lose. Like SMU, I think is in, aren't they? They've already clinched, haven't they?
The ACC championship?
Yeah.
Is that what you're talking about? Yes.
Because they haven't lost a conference game yet.
Let me see.
SMU's only loss this year was to BYU.
Yeah, they're undefeated in the they're 7-0. And then this week they have Cal. So they have one more conference game to play.
So there's a chance, because Clemson only has 1 conference loss and Miami has 1 conference
loss.
And
Clemson is done.
Right.
With their ACC
with the conference.
Play.
Right.
With the ACC, and then Miami has Syracuse.
So there's a chance that the ACC could get 3 in if Clemson's not the one that gets in the ACC title game. So if Miami and SMU both win this weekend, and Miami plays Syracuse.
Oh yeah, right, yeah.
At Syracuse, that's a good win for Miami. Syracuse is 8-3, and then you have SMU plays Cal. They're not that good. Although a nice win for them coming back to beat Stanford this weekend. They're going to a bowl game, by the way. I believe Cal's 6-5 now.
Okay,
I believe. So that's a decent win. I mean, hey, SEC teams are losing to 6-5 teams all the time,
right?
But those teams are SEC 6-5s are better. Yeah, that 6-5 SEC team played in Miami earlier in the year and got just annihilated, but whatevs. So I think there's a chance that you could see a third ACC team get in if Clemson Clemson's going to have to whip South Carolina this weekend to have a chance to. I do think that could happen, Vince, because they were sitting there at 17 last week. They're going to jump Colorado. They're going to jump Texas A&M. They're going to jump BYU. Given, like, no doubt that moves them up to 14th. Maybe Arizona State jumps them. I don't think that they will, though.
I don't think they will
So
either.
you're talking about them immediately going up to 14. Now, if they whoop South Carolina this weekend, and do they move ahead of Ole Miss?
Okay, here's my question to you.
Do they move ahead of Bama?
Do you put Clemson? Yeah, what that was going to be my question. Alabama, Ole Miss, Clemson. Who do you rank higher? Because Clemson's got 2 losses right now. Those teams have 3.
The problem with Clemson is what's the wins that you're hanging your hat on if you're Clemson?
Fair.
That's my problem with Clemson being in, because Clemson's got a good record, but they haven't beat anybody. They've only played 2 good teams all year, and they got beat by both of them. Well, I think the win over Virginia Tech on the road was a good win, but they beat Pitt this weekend on the road. That game was a good, or 2 weeks ago. That was a good win, but Pitt is fading bad. I look at it, Vince, and it's like, here's who they beat: App State, NC State, Stanford, Florida State, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, Pitt, and the Citadel. Is beating South Carolina, a 3-loss SEC team, enough to get them vaulted into the playoff? It could be, because it's Clemson.
Right.
That's the thing.
Right, exactly.
It's like they're way too close to SMU than what they should be when you consider who SMU has played and who SMU has beat. SMU's ranked 13th because they're SMU. That's it. They lost to a top 25 team. They beat Louisville on the road. They blew out Pitt. I mean, they've been far more convincing in their victories than what Clemson has been this season, but they're SMU. So, I mean, I think you have to put Clemson over Ole Miss, because Ole Miss's losses are so bad. Because at least with Clemson, they have 2 good losses. Georgia beat them, and Louisville beat them. Louisville's the team that's been ranked a bunch this year. So at least they have good losses. I don't think you can put them in now, but I think what the committee's going to do is get them close enough to where if they blow out South Carolina, they can maybe jump them in.
They could.
Maybe.
Potentially.
Depending on what happens this weekend. But if Vandy beats Tennessee, then that opens the door wide open for Clemson if they beat South Carolina.
Yeah.
Because now all those SEC teams have 3 losses.
Right.
And now if they lose to, I mean, you're going to get a third SEC team in, I think, just because the committee's just going to make it happen.
Agreed.
But I don't know who should be in. I don't know that any of them deserve to be in. They're losing to they're losing to average teams, Vince. Like this whole notion, the SEC, the teams at the top, they just beat each other up. No, they're not. If they were beating each other up, they'd all have 1 loss, maybe 2. That's it. But they're losing, like Georgia and Texas are in sort of the beating each other up category. Because say what you want about Georgia, and I don't think they're that good of a team, but their losses are to Bama and Ole Miss.
Yeah.
They're beating everybody. Now, it's not always pretty, but they're at least winning all their other games. Texas lost to Georgia. They've beat everybody else. Bama and Ole Miss are losing to bad teams. Kentucky beat Ole Miss. Vanderbilt beat Alabama. Oklahoma just destroyed Alabama. Florida beat Ole Miss. LSU beat Ole Miss. I mean, heck, middle of the road Big Ten USC beat LSU. So that's not a great accomplishment. So I just don't know how you do it. And I think what we're seeing now is the ACC and the Big 12 are not getting enough respect as leagues. And when the Big 12 eats each other up, it's because they're bad. When the SEC eats each other up, it's because they're good. Because it's narrative driven, not actually resume driven. Because if you actually look at the Big 12, there's a lot of really good non-conference wins against other Power 5 teams in that league. But they're just not getting the love right now, Vince. And I think they're way too far back to get a second team in my opinion. They're just too far back to get a second team in. I think the only chance that one of these leagues has is maybe the ACC gets a third team in if Miami and SMU handle business this weekend and Clemson destroys South Carolina. Not just beat South Carolina. I think they have to whoop them. Double digits. Whoop them. And then I think you could see Clemson sneak in, which I would be happy about because I think they'd get into that range where they'd be playing Notre Dame, and I got some payback I want to give Clemson from last season. So, I mean, that's Vince. It's going to get, and then you probably get one more SEC team, right? So that'd be 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you'd probably then get a third SEC team in at some point in time there.
Yeah, I've
No,
got
no, you
3.
wouldn't, because you'd have to have a Big 12 team. So basically, Clemson is there in case the SEC completely implodes.
Yes,
That's how I look at it.
I agree with you. I think they're knocking on. I've got them in that neighborhood of like right outside, kind of on the outside looking in. But if something kind of crazy happens above them, then they sneak a spot.
Right.
You know,
Right.
because they're if they can beat South Carolina, that's going to be a feather in their cap. That'll be their biggest win of the year. There's no
And it
doubt
would
about
be a common opponent with both South Carolina. I mean, with both Ole Miss and Bama.
Sure.
And if they beat South Carolina by 17 or 20, which I don't think is going to happen. I don't think they're going to beat South Carolina by that much if they beat them at all. But you'd have a situation where they say, well, look, Bama beat this team by 2 points and almost lost at the end of the game. And we just smacked them, right? Could that be enough to then vault them ahead of Bama? Because I think what will happen is you'll see Clemson go ahead of Ole Miss and be behind Tennessee and Bama. And then if Tennessee loses next week to Vanderbilt, they'd fall behind. I mean, if you're the SEC right now, Vince, you are Tennessee. Please, Tennessee, handle business next weekend against Vanderbilt. And then you're gold. Because then you'd have the 4 Big Ten teams. You'd have Notre Dame. You'd have the Boise State. You'd have the Big 12 champ. You'd have the SEC champ, the SEC number 2, then the SEC number 3, and then you'd have 2 ACC teams. Because I think what the biggest impact this weekend had is this weekend opened up a second spot for an ACC team. I absolutely think it did.
Yeah, so for me, based on the rankings that I think are going to come out, the SEC lost a bid. Basically, the SEC lost a bid, and it went to the ACC.
You're saying they went from 4 to 3?
Yes, that's what I've got. Mm-hmm. Right? They went from 4 to 3 because those other teams that lost, they dropped out, and so they're not in anymore. And then that allowed SMU to sneak in. That's
I don't think it's fair that they had to sneak in. To be honest with you, I think they kind of should have been higher anyway. But no, I think you're correct, Vince. I think that right now, I'm very curious to your point to see, like, Bama was 7, Ole Miss, SMU was 13. When Georgia went out and got destroyed by 18 by a ranked team, they went from 3rd to 12th. That was a 9-spot drop. How do you not drop Bama just as much by getting destroyed by an unranked 5-5 team? You know what I mean? Like, how do you drop Georgia that much when they lost and not do that to Bama? Because remember, Georgia was number 3 in the first rankings. That week they got beat by Ole Miss. They dropped all the way down to 12, 9 spots. Miami, when they got beat by Georgia Tech, dropped 5 spots. So how do you not move Bama down at least 5 spots, which would put them from 7 to 12, and maybe more spots? Like,
I've got him 13,
which would put them out. I mean, at 12 would put them actually 11 now.
11 is in.
Put them out.
11 is in.
You'd have
11 is in.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
11 have the 11. SEC champ, the ACC champ are both ahead of them, and the Big Ten champs both ahead of them, right?
So the SMU would still be in because the ACC champ is already there.
Right.
Okay. They're already in.
Right.
Okay.
Based on the current ranking, we're just taking the highest ranked, correct? Okay.
Correct. And the group of 5 is already in.
Right.
So that doesn't bump them down any.
Right.
Okay.
Where do you have Boise?
I have Boise 9.
Okay. All right. That answers my question. I'm thinking you have Boise behind them and then the Big 12 behind them.
Right.
So it only be the Big
12 I did.
Jump them. Okay.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Got it.
And honestly, I wouldn't even have the Big 12 jumping them because I got the Big 12 as the 12 seed. So they don't even jump them, but they get in. Or, I mean, I guess they would jump. They would jump
whoever's 12.
Whoever's 12, which I have as Clemson, actually.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Figure what the heck.
Yeah, that's the problem, Vince, is a lot of these teams that are sitting there with 1 or 2 losses don't have a lot of great wins.
Right.
You know, that's the reality of it. But that's what makes this kind of interesting. So I'm quite confident Ole Miss is going to drop because I don't think the committee was in love with them to begin with.
Yeah, I've got them
That's
behind
also
Alabama
why
too.
they were at 16 to start. It's why they dropped them. They were still behind Georgia and Tennessee and Georgia. They were behind all the SEC teams, including, I think, weren't they behind A&M as well when the first rankings came out? Let
Yeah,
me go
I
look.
believe so.
Yeah, they were behind. They were behind. Georgia was ahead of them. Texas was ahead of them. Tennessee was ahead of them. Bama was ahead of them. A&M and LSU. 6 SEC teams were ahead of them the first weekend of the rankings. That was only a couple weeks ago. And then when they beat Georgia that next week, they obviously jumped in and were but even then they were still the number 4 SEC team, even with the win over Georgia. So I don't think the committee is all that high on Ole Miss. This past week, they jumped to 3rd because of the Tennessee loss to Georgia. I don't think the committee's all that high on Ole Miss, to be honest with you. And so I could see them falling down because, I think the only reason they were ahead of Georgia and Tennessee is because they all had the same record. They beat Georgia. Georgia beat Tennessee. It would have been hard to kind of have one of those two teams ahead of them. You can't have Tennessee ahead of them because they just lost to Georgia. You couldn't put Georgia ahead of them because they just got smacked by Ole Miss 2 weeks ago. I think having that 3rd loss is exactly what the committee needs to just, all right, Ole Miss, you had your chance. You're out.
Yeah, I've got them as my 5th best SEC team right now.
I think they're out.
So they're out by 2.
Yeah,
for me.
They're way out.
Yeah, they're way out.
And I think they'll be behind Texas, they'll be behind Georgia, they'll be behind Tennessee, they'll be behind Alabama, and I think they're going to be behind South Carolina.
Oh, wow.
I do.
Okay.
Now, I don't think they should be.
Okay.
But South Carolina was at 18 last week. I would not be shocked if Ole Miss falls because, again, we talked about when Georgia fell 9 spots. I could see them dropping them way down. Because I think they want to try to set South Carolina up for somebody else's resume builder is what I think we could see. And if they're going to give Clemson a big jump, I think they also give South Carolina a big jump to try to maybe boost that resume.
Where was South Carolina before? They were like 18 or something.
They were at 18 this past week. Clemson was at 17. Okay. So I could see them having them at like 12 and 14, 13 and 14, 14 and 15, something like that.
Okay.
This week is what I could see. So, Vince, this is probably one of the weeks where I'm having the toughest time on where they're going to put people because I'm trying to project where I think they're going to put teams. And this is what this whole conversation is about. What do we think they're going to do? This isn't what you and I think they should do.
Correct.
Because that conversation would have been real quick. All those 3-loss SEC teams are out.
Gone.
You can't lose 3. You can't – like Georgia was the only SEC team that could have lost 3 games and still had an argument to get in because, let's say Georgia this year, Vince, would have lost to – let's say they lost to Clemson in the opener. They'd have lost to Bama and Ole Miss. You say, okay, they'd still have wins over Texas and Tennessee. Let's say they'd have beat Clemson, beat Bama, or beat Clemson, lost to Bama, lost to Ole Miss, and lost to Texas, let's say. They still would have beat Clemson. They still would have beat Tennessee. They still would have beat Florida. You know what I mean? So, no matter how you shake it, with 3 losses, they were still going to have 2 great wins. Whereas a lot of these other teams have, no great wins or just 1 great win. And their losses are all great losses. The problem with Bama and Ole Miss is they have nothing but bad losses outside of the 1 loss to Tennessee that Bama has. All of Ole Miss's losses are to unranked teams. And 2 of Bama's losses are to unranked teams. So I think that's what hurts them. That's why Georgia's still going to be real high. I think Georgia's going to end up hosting now, Vince. I think this opened up a path for Georgia to not only get in, but to host the game as the 7 or 8 seed.
I've got them hosting at 8.
Yeah.
I've got them hosting at 8 this week. Now, we'll see what happens next week, obviously, because they've got one more game, and then they've also got the SEC championship. But at the present, it's interesting because the way that I do the rankings first, and then I just fill in the seedings, right, based on all the rules and everything like that. And the interesting part for me is first round games. I've got IU and Penn State. So you got Big Ten playing against themselves, and then I've got Georgia, Tennessee, which is SEC playing against themselves. I don't know if the committee is going to try to avoid that or not, or what that looks like, but that's just the way my rankings ended up working out. So IU would be traveling to Penn State 10-7, and then Georgia would be hosting Tennessee 8-9. Ohio State is hosting Arizona State because Arizona State's the Big 12 champ, but they're in the 12 slot. And then Notre Dame's hosting SMU in the first round. And then they would play Miami in the second round. So that's just the way everything worked out.
Do you have I know you did what you think the rankings will be. Do you have like what you think they should be?
I haven't
that
even
that would
thought
actually
about
be
that,
an
to be honest
interesting
with you.
conversation. So, because I'm actually kind of looking through this now, Vince, and I'm kind of looking at like last week's rankings, where I think teams will fall, where I think teams will be. So I'll give you, if you don't mind, I'll kind of give you what I have right now
For what you think it should be, or
what
you
I
think
think
it will
should be.
Okay,
what it
go ahead.
should be based on last week's ranking. So like not starting all over from scratch and what my rankings should be, but based off what last week's rankings were and what I think that they will be this week, or what they should be this week based on where things were last week, and based on where they were, but also with a little caveat of what I think they should do. So it's a little bit of both. I think I'd have Oregon 1, I'd have Ohio State 2, I'd have Texas 3. I personally would have Notre Dame 4 and Penn State 5.
That's what I have.
But I could see the committee saying we're going to wait one more week before we leap Notre Dame over Penn State, because we want to see them play that second common opponent of USC. And then I could see them kind of leaping them at that point in time. I would have them ahead now. I think Miami's going to be 6. I have Georgia 7, Tennessee 8, Boise 9, SMU 10, Indiana 11. And then what comes next is going to be interesting, because I think it's going to either be Alabama or Clemson is who I think, because if you look at last week's rankings, 7, 9, 14, 15, and 16 all lost. That's 5 teams. So I think Clemson rises all the way up and is either right behind or right ahead of Bama. So that's the one I'm not sure of, Vince. I personally would put Alabama ahead of Clemson for now. And the reason I say that is because, yes, Bama has one more loss, but they have their 2 best wins are better than anything that Clemson has done, in my opinion. When you look at beating Georgia, a team that Clemson lost to 34-3, and then Bama also beat South Carolina and Missouri, who are both ranked. And you could even argue that beating LSU is better than anything that Clemson has done so far. I mean, that's the reality of it. I mean, that's the problem with Clemson's resume, Vince, is they've beaten App State, NC State, Stanford, Florida State, Wake Forest, Virginia Tech, and Pitt. Their best win is literally over Pitt, who is not a very good football. They're 7-4 right now. And, I mean, I would rank LSU ahead of Pitt right now, honestly. So that's why I think Bama is going to be at 12. Now, 12 has them, like to you, as you said earlier, 12 has them out. But here's the thing, Vince, with Clemson at 13, they're in striking distance where I could see South Carolina being right behind them at 14. And then if they beat South Carolina convincingly, you now have another, because right now the only common opponent between Alabama and Clemson is Georgia, who Bama beat and Clemson got whooped by. But if Clemson goes out there and whoops South Carolina, who Alabama barely beat, that might be the thing that they could maybe use to put them ahead. But I think they're going to try to get that third SEC team in. So I think Alabama is going to be sitting there at 12, waiting on somebody else to lose, positioning them into where if Tennessee gets beat, Bama replaces them. That's what I think they're going to do. And honestly, it's kind of what I would do, because after you get past Georgia at 7, there's you got Boise's good and SMU's good. There's a lot of really shaky resumes after that, other than that, Vince. I mean, Tennessee's got a real shaky resume. Their win over Bama doesn't look as good now. I mean, heck, Oklahoma beat Bama and Vanderbilt beat Bama more convincingly as far as gameplay than what Tennessee did. Clemson's got a shaky resume. Indiana's got a shaky resume. There's a lot of not good resumes after the top 7, 8, in my opinion. And so
you and I are very close, by the way. What our 1 through 9 were identical.
Yeah.
Our 1 through 9 were identical. We had IU and SMU flipped. Okay. Yeah. I mean, okay. You know what I mean?
I just think the fact is SMU's got much wins. That's
I don't disagree with you.
I mean, they've
Yeah,
got to
I
win over
gotcha.
Louisville. They've got to win over, gosh, what's the other one? Man, uh, Pitt, right? Pitt. That's what. And then I mean, that's better than anything Indiana's done. Those are both better than anything Indiana has done this year.
Agreed.
That's why I would say that's why I could see SMU being ahead of them. But I get where you're coming from. That's a big difference between 5 and 13,
Right.
and then just one loss to the number 2 team in the country. So I could see yours being
So
correct. Yeah.
IU, So we just had those flipped. And then you were kind of discussing where basically the next 4 teams that I have
Yeah.
on where they're going to be. And so
And that's
what
what
I
gets
did,
murky.
my first swing at it, right, was I put Clemson 12, Alabama 13, Ole Miss 14, South Carolina 15. So I put Clemson just by virtue of their record being 9-2. I just put them above the block of SEC teams that all have 3 losses, and then it's Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina in that order.
I got something crazy for you, Vince.
All right.
I don't disagree with anything you just said except for one thing. Because again, not 1 through 11, we just have a couple where
It's just 9,
they're
10,
split.
and 11 are flipped.
I
That's
think
it.
there's a big difference between 9, 10, 11. Where do you?
9 and 10, or 10 and 11. We haven't flipped. Excuse me.
There's
IU and SMU.
very clear. Here's who the top 11 should be, in my opinion.
Yeah,
It gets real murky after that.
I
I
agree.
will not be at all shocked, if we see Ole Miss fall not only behind the teams that you mentioned, but potentially falling behind Arizona State and potentially falling behind Tulane.
Oh wow,
Yeah.
wow.
Because again, I think the committee needs to protect itself from having a very low ranked team in the playoff or a 3 to 4 loss team. So like if the Big 12 continues to eat itself, there's a chance, Vince, you could have a Big 12 champ with 4 losses. It's unlikely, or excuse me, 3 losses. It's unlikely, but it's possible. And so when I look at that, I mean, I think Arizona State, they're going to, because they're the hot team in the Big 12, I think that could position them to say, hey, let's get them up to 14 or 15 to where if they now go win their next couple, then when we jump them in, it doesn't look as bad, where they're 18th and then you have to put them in. I think the optics of it are going to matter to the committee. And they're going to be able to look at Arizona State and have now sort of an argument to say, let's give them a bump because they just beat the number 14 team in the country. And a week before, they knocked off a K-State team by 10 on the road, who you just had ranked in the top 20 a week ago. They're going to be able to look at Arizona State and say, hey, guys, we've seen it. We've now seen them 2 weeks in a row knock off ranked teams. We're bumping them way up. I could see something like that. And I think both of those teams, I'm confident that Arizona State's going to jump ahead of Ole Miss. Not like super, I'm betting a mortgage on it, but I just feel like they're gonna do that to try to get them up in there. If they don't do that with Arizona State, then I could see them doing that with Tulane. Because I think they need to try to get that 5th conference champ in better position right now. And that's why BYU is 14. I just don't think they want to be sitting there with the 5th at-large bid being a team ranked 19th or 20th. That's going to be a bad look for your first playoff. You know what I mean? And so that's why I think one of those 2 is going to get a bump. And if I had to guess who that's going to be, I would guess Arizona State.
Okay.
Is who that would be. So don't be shocked if that one, because I agree with you that that's a big jump from 21.
Yeah, it's a big jump, man.
But what the committee says they do is they look at your entire resume all over again. They start from scratch.
Right.
Well, if you start from scratch on Arizona State's resume and you get out preconceived ideas of what they should be or whatever the case may be, you start looking at it and saying they beat Kansas, which now looks a lot better. They beat Kansas State on the road by 10. They beat BYU this past weekend in a game where they really led the entire game. They've got a really bad loss to Cincinnati and a really bad loss to Texas Tech, but they did beat an SEC team. And they're going to look at it that way and say, hey, look, this team has proven themselves, competent. They beat a 6-5 Texas State team. They're going to say, hey, I think this team is, and they're hot. That's the other thing they're going to say. This team is hot. And I think they're going to get a big bump. And they are hot. I mean, they blew out Oklahoma State. They beat Kansas State convincingly. They beat BYU. I think they're going to get a big bump. I think they're going to at least get up to 15, but I definitely feel good about them being ahead of Ole Miss. I think the committee's going to punish Ole Miss because I don't think they like Ole Miss as a team. I don't blame them. Their losses are really bad, like really bad. And the last thing you want to be sitting there doing is Tennessee gets upset and Bama gets upset this weekend, and now you've got to put a 3-loss Ole Miss team in there that lost to 3 unranked teams. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? So that's why I think they're going to try to jockey and position a couple teams, Clemson being one, and a couple of these other teams to kind of say, hey, look, we're going to try to position them better. We've seen them do that before.
Oh yeah, and to
I
set up
think
better
Arizona
matchups
State,
and to prop up certain teams, they'll rank a team low in the bottom 25 to to give a ranked win to a team that they're trying to give some credit to, that kind of stuff. And so that's the last part of this thing that I'm interested to see on Tuesday, Brian, and we haven't really talked about it, is what is the committee going to do with A&M, Army, and in my opinion, Louisville, and potentially Georgia Tech as well. So, like, obviously Notre Dame opponents, but what are they going to do with them? That's what I'm interested to see, because I think Louisville's right there on the bubble of getting into the top 25 right now. And then, to your point about them propping up potential conference champions, do they really want to dump Army out of the top 25 right now, because they've already clinched a spot in their championship game?
Right.
Okay. And then you've got A&M, who not only does it prop up Notre Dame, but it also props up some SEC teams as well. It's not just Notre Dame. So
let's talk about this too, Vince. A&M still controls their own destiny
to get into the SEC championship.
If they beat Texas this weekend, I'm pretty sure I read this today that they would get in against Georgia, and Texas would be out, because Texas would be 0-2. Think about this. They'd have 2 losses, and they would be, because all the other teams have 3 SEC, like Tennessee has 2 losses, but they'd be out because of the other factors. Ole Miss has 3 conference losses. Bama has 3 conference losses.
Right now, Georgia, Tennessee, and A&M will have 2 losses.
Right. And Texas has 1. Yeah. But from what I could be wrong, so somebody in the chat can correct me, but I believe what I read was if A&M wins, because of all the tiebreakers, A&M would get in against Georgia's in, because Georgia's done in the SEC. They play Georgia Tech this weekend. Their resume is already complete.
Yep.
Georgia's in. The winner, I believe, from what I read, the winner of the A&M Texas game is the next team to get in. Bama's out.
Kind of an eliminator.
Tennessee's out.
Okay.
And I think Ole Miss is. I believe that's what I read, Vince. I could be incorrect.
Ole Miss is definitely out. They got 3 losses.
If you're the committee, you can't drop A&M down too far.
Yeah, good point.
Because now all of a sudden your SEC champ is what? Not going to get an automatic bid?
Good point.
I mean, think about that. If A&M falls too far and they beat Texas and Georgia the next week, you're going to have to jump them really freaking high to get them ahead of the 4 teams ahead of them. Are you going to drop them below Arizona State? You're going to drop them below – I mean, you got to be careful how far you drop them because of the optics, and that stuff shouldn't matter, but I think it does.
Wow.
And so I think they're going to leave. I think they're going to have A&M no lower than 20th, because at 20, Vince, you beat Texas, you can jump up 6-7 spots the next week, get to 12 or 13, and then you beat Georgia, and all of a sudden, just like that, you're a top 10 team, and now they got the bye.
Sure.
But then here's what gets crazy. Then there's a great chance that the SEC champ is the 4.
If it's A&M, yeah.
Yeah. And it's still not, I mean, I think Georgia leaps Miami either this week or next. That's what I think, because weren't they behind Miami this past week?
Yes, by 1.
So I don't see how you can, they were 8, Georgia was 10. Miami was 8, Georgia was 10.
Okay, by 2.
Georgia did not look great against UMass. Miami at least beat a Power 5 team. But I think once Georgia beats Georgia Tech, who beat Miami, then Georgia goes right ahead of them. Right? I mean, that's now you got the common opponent and blah, 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 blah. And,
sure.
But if that doesn't happen, then and Miami runs the table, then all of a sudden you're going to have the Big Ten champ. You're going to have the ACC champ. And you're going to have the SEC champ. Now, all of a sudden, the SEC champ's the 3 seed.
Well, but depending on what Boise does.
Georgia's already ahead of Boise.
Oh, so you're saying if Georgia wins?
If
Okay,
Georgia wins,
gotcha.
out, I could see that.
I thought you were saying if Texas A&M wins out. Texas
No,
A&M wins out, I think
if
they're the
if it
4.
wins out, they're either 4th or 5th.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like it could get real crazy. So it's going to get wild. These next couple weeks are going to be. Now I think we're going to actually have some calm. I actually think the next couple weeks are going to be kind of calm. I just have not liked A&M's body language the last couple weeks, Vince. I just think their lack of depth is really hurting them, and they're just worn out. I mean, do you see that? I see a
They
team
had a
that's just
hell of a comeback last night, though, man.
yeah,
It fell
they
short,
did
obviously, but
right.
I mean they were down 21-0. I thought that
Yeah,
game was
I just
over.
think they're out of gas, man. I
Yeah.
do. I just don't think they've got the depth. I think the Marcel Reed thing. I still don't think that was the proper. I mean, get why they did it. I still don't think that was necessarily the proper move. You know, this whole is if Notre Dame would have played A&M with Marcel Reed, blah blah blah. And I'm like, well, what's A&M's record since Marcel Reed took over
Right.
as starting quarterback? You know what I'm saying?
That's just ending
Right. I
Raiders. It is
mean,
what it is.
they're 1-2 since he took over as starting quarterback. So they got blown out by South Carolina, and then got beat this past weekend by Auburn, who's 5-6. You know what I mean? So, man, I just think they're worn out. So I think Texas beats A&M. I hope I'm wrong on that. That'd be great to see that.
Oh, that would be absolute
And
utter chaos. That would be
yeah, and I
glorious.
think Georgia beats Georgia Tech, although I would love to be wrong on that.
If A&M
And
goes to the SEC championship game, then obviously Notre Dame's best win is vaulted.
yes.
Just saying.
And Louisville's now you brought up Louisville and Georgia Tech. When you look at the bottom of the rankings, the problem is there were not as many lower in the rankings losses. So if you look at the college football playoff rankings for last week, you had number 17 won, number 18 won, number 20 had a bye, number 21 won, number 22 won, number 23 won, number 24 won, number 25 won. So it's going to be hard.
Hard to drop them out. Yeah.
Now, does Colorado go from 16th to out? Possibly. Does BYU go from 14th to out? Unlikely. They lost on the road to number 21. They're not going to get knocked out of the top 25.
They were ranking Colorado based on the fact that they might be in the Big 12 championship game.
That's right.
And now that they don't need them anymore, they could absolutely fall out.
And then number 19, Army lost. They could knock out. So there's a chance that either Army stays in, which for two reasons. One is primarily is you want to get the two AAC teams ranked when they play each other. Because again, if chaos happens, you don't want to put an unranked Army team in the country. You know what I mean? Like it's just, But the other reason would be obviously to give Notre Dame a boost. But I could see Army falling out. I could see Colorado falling out, and then maybe jumping in a couple 4-loss teams from the ACC, Georgia Tech and Louisville. Now, not to necessarily boost Notre Dame, although it would. Georgia Tech getting a bump, I think, would be good because now all of a sudden you've got a chance for Georgia to have a ranked win.
Yeah.
And a ranked win over a team that beat Miami, which vaults Georgia up the rankings and potentially gets them into that number 2 spot if they win out, right? And then you also have a situation with Louisville where, okay, yeah, Clemson has a second loss, but it's to a top 25 Louisville team. I think Louisville being ranked also boosts SMU, which allows them to move SMU up. It allows them to move Notre Dame up. So we've seen this for years, guys. They'll move teams into the bottom of the half of the top 25 to help teams that they want to kind of give a boost in some other things. It would not shock me if one of them is in the rankings this week. And if I had to bet, I'd probably go Georgia Tech because I think they would put Georgia Tech in to boost.
Mm-hmm. Just boost that matchup. Just boost that
and then they could say with Georgia Tech, like, hey, they just recently beat Miami, so they're kind of hot. Whereas Louisville would be a tougher case, even though they were ranked in the top 22 weeks ago. And they just, they bounced back from that Stanford loss and just annihilated Pitt yesterday. But they're still 2 weeks removed from losing to Stanford. Where Georgia Tech's a little bit of a different deal because Georgia Tech lost to Virginia Tech now 3 weeks ago, but since then they beat Miami and they beat NC State. You could maybe say, hey, it wouldn't shock me if one of those two gets in there.
Yeah,
it wouldn't. Right. And so somebody said in the chat, it would give Miami a quality loss and it would give Notre Dame a quality win. I could see, and it would set Georgia up to get a ranked win as well.
Sure.
It would impact 3 teams that you're trying to move around. And I could see that as well, Vince. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? They're just as much chaos as there was at the top of the top 25. There wasn't a whole lot in the bottom of the
Yeah,
top.
no, I get that. Yeah, for sure. It'll be interesting because the committee always does this. They always put teams in an advantageous position to back up what they've done. I mean, that's just what they do. And so, are they going to do that to help Notre Dame? Are they going to do that to help Georgia? You know what I mean? Like, who is in line to get that help and how are they going to do it? That's going to be the fascinating part about all of this. So there's a lot of question marks going into this thing on Tuesday night, and we will be around to break it all down for you guys on Tuesday.
It could also be that Louisville doesn't jump in now, but Louisville jumps in next week if they beat Kentucky.
Well, yeah, that's definitely possible.
Right. And then they're 8-4 at the end, and then they use that to.
And that's when it matters. Let's be honest. I mean, that's when it matters. Now, we're going to get a glimpse into what the committee is thinking, obviously, in this week's rankings. And, Notre Dame has one more opportunity to impress the committee when they travel to LA. So
that's a big one.
It's a huge one. It's a huge one.
Winning you're in and winning you host. I mean, that's the reality of it. Now, are you a 5, a 6, or a 7 seed? That's basically where we're at now.
Yep.
I think them falling down to 8 is almost impossible now.
I agree.
I mean, maybe if Georgia wins the SEC and Texas beats Texas A&M and it's a close game, maybe you kind of have Texas doesn't fall all the way down. At worst case, I think 8 is still the worst possible scenario for Notre Dame.
Oh, and that would be a bad scenario. Like something bad had to have happened somehow, some way for Notre Dame to drop that far.
Bad for Notre Dame?
Like as in around them.
8
like
seed.
Chaos. Yeah.
Seed. Because like right now, with where you and I have them,
they're 6.
They would be 7th, wouldn't they?
6.
You have them ranked number 4.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have them 5.
Okay, I have them 4.
Let's just kind of work with the assumption of the committee leaves Penn State ahead of them for now.
So then they're yeah.
That would drop them to 7.
Mm-hmm.
In a world where Georgia beats A&M or beats Texas in the title game by a close game, it's competitive. I could see Texas not falling behind Notre Dame with the whole we're not going to punish them for playing in the SEC championship game kind of crap. And then Georgia would obviously leap them because they'd win the SEC. And then in my scenario, that would drop them to 8.
I just don't see a world where when everything's all said and done, Penn State's still ahead of Notre Dame.
I don't think they should either. But like, let's say that Notre Dame beats USC in overtime this week. Well, what's the if they don't jump them this week?
Right.
Then it may not happen.
Yeah.
But if Notre Dame whips them, then
that falls under the category of Notre Dame not doing their job.
Right.
You know what I mean? So if Notre Dame does that, they deserve to not jump Penn State.
Sure, because you'd have
they just don't, right? I mean, because then your only common opponent is Purdue.
And they beat them by 39. You beat them by 59. You both killed them.
Right. And at that point, it's nuance. And okay, fine. You don't move them.
Right.
Notre Dame has to take care of business. They got to beat USC by a bigger margin. They can't go to overtime with USC.
Right. And if A&M loses to Texas, then they fall behind Illinois, and all of a sudden their best win's better than your best win. I mean that's where I'm saying I could see that scenario playing out, where that they could fall to 8. It would just it would be like the inside straight of things to go against Notre Dame.
Correct.
But even then, they're still hosting.
Right. That's true.
Right. Right now, I'm still in the 6 to 8 category. I'm more closer to 6 and 7. I think you and I are kind of there. I still think Georgia wins a rematch. I mean, Texas wins the rematch against Georgia. I still believe that. I do. I don't think Georgia's going to beat Texas twice.
Yeah.
Yeah. And somebody asked, I don't think A&M's loss. Like, look, guys, 11 games into the year, losses aren't really – what your opponents are doing is not mattering as much anymore. Like, Notre Dame just beat the number 19 team in the country. The team that they played in week 1 losing is not going to affect their ranking. They just beat the committee's number 19 team by 5 touchdowns. They're either going to stay put or go up. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it.
All right. Well, like I said, there's a bunch of questions to be answered, and there will be more questions probably coming out of Tuesday night than there were going in, and that's okay. We have a super chat here from Relly Q. Thank you very much for the super chat. Based on how the playoff is structured with a group of 5 teams and wild card slots, it looks like number 5 might be the best spot in these brackets going forward, which as far as ND can go, versus the 12, then the 4, the 8 or 9 or 1. Agree. For Notre Dame, I
Well,
agree, because they don't have to play a championship game. That's not the same for everybody else, because if it's a team that lost in the championship game, then they're not getting all of the weeks off that a
right.
Notre Dame would get. But I agree that the 5 is a great spot for Notre Dame. I have no problem with it, actually.
In theory, like if you take out just in general, you're correct. It's the best path of least resistance for Notre Dame. I'll be honest, Vince. I don't think the 5 seed is the best thing for Notre Dame this year. And here's why I say that. The problem for Notre Dame is they have so thoroughly annihilated all their opponents for the last 2 months that let's say they're the 5 seed and they get the 12 seed. It's going to be some 3-loss SEC team who's struggling. It's going to be the Big 12 champ who's not that good. It's going to be Arizona State, Bama, Boise, somebody like that. And then the next round, you're getting that other team, whether it be the Big 12 champ who jumps in or Boise. Now, all of a sudden, you're going to play number 1 Oregon or number 1 Ohio State, and you haven't played a competitive game in 3 months. I don't know that that's necessarily the best thing for Notre Dame. I think getting a better opponent at 6 or 7 and then playing a better opponent at 2 or 3 will help them be more battle tested to then go into the semifinals when they actually play somebody really good. Because again, the way that this team is playing right now and the way that these other teams are playing, there's no 2 seed that's going to scare me. There's no 3 seed that's going to scare me. You know what I mean? And so I kind of, and especially since those teams will be having sat for 3 weeks and not have played where Notre Dame gets a game under their belt. So I actually think Notre Dame getting a 6 or a 7 would be a little bit more beneficial to them this year than normal because of the way that their schedule, because Florida State's not good, because USC is not as good, where you're going to need a little bit of test. I don't want to go into the semifinals and the last time you played a team that was even remotely close to you, you play Florida State, who sucks at the end. You play Virginia, who's not that good. You play Army, who's really good but not talented. You play USC, who's not that good. Then you beat Arizona State in the first round. You beat Boise State in the second round. And then you got to go play Ohio State or Oregon. Like, dude, it's been a long time since you've been on the field with a team that can hang with you somewhat from a roster standpoint, whereas Ohio State will have played Indiana, Oregon, and then whoever they play in the quarters, that 8 or 9 seed, they're going to be a lot more battle tested. And as we've seen this year, those teams that are more battle tested, a lot of these times have won these games versus the teams who haven't played anybody in a while. And I think that's what hurt Clemson against Louisville. That's what hurt Texas against Georgia. We've seen that a lot. That's what hurt Indiana against Ohio State. The speed of the game was just way too much for Indiana. And that's why I say this particular year, I actually feel that way. But in theory, Vince, in like a normal year, you are spot on correct that being the 5 is the best case scenario for Notre Dame. And I still prefer that to playing a conference. Why would I give up a home playoff game to play in a neutral site conference championship game against a better team than what I would face at home in the first round of the playoff? That makes no sense to me. Other than just I think a lot of people will say, we just want to say we have a bye. Why? It's not a better path for you. It's a better path to not play in the conference title game against a top team, to get the 12 seed, and then to play the 4th best conference champion in the second round. I would much rather do that than have the 1 seed where you're going to get some like 8 seed who is actually a really good team but had some bad loss that you know what I'm saying? I think 5 in most situations is always going to be where it was much better than getting a bye. And because like this year, let's say that they'd be the 4 seed. So then in their first game, they got to play the 5 seed. You know what I mean? Instead of getting, I just pass. I'm good with what they've got now. I am. And you convinced me of that.
All right. Well, that's going to do it for our look at the college football playoff rankings and what they might be. Thanks for the super sticker there, Rocket25. Appreciate you very much. And look, we're going to be back to discuss it all on Tuesday night during the show and after the show and all that fun stuff. And so we'll see what the committee actually does with this multitude of information and the craziness that was Saturday and all of that stuff. And, it's going to be wild. And we're going to get a kind of a peek into what the committee's thinking, and that will have an effect on where things are going. But at the end of the day, if you're a Notre Dame fan, they just need to take care of business and they need to do it the way that they should do it, on Saturday, and then the rest will kind of take care of itself. So, win and you got a home game. I mean, that's basically what it is to me. Win and you've got a home game, and it'll be fantastic. So I'm looking forward to it. It should be a lot of fun. One more Saturday to go, and then we all get to sit back and watch conference championship games. So
let me say one thing. Our schedule is going to be a little bit different this week. We're going to go live tomorrow at 1, and we'll go live on Wednesday at 1, and then Friday at 1. Right now, I'm uncertain of what we're going to do on Tuesday. My grandmother's passed away this past week, as many of you know, and her viewing is on Tuesday and her funeral is on Wednesday. And so I won't be there for this Tuesday show in the afternoon, most likely. We'll see. I will be there for the Tuesday evening show because we'll be in the hotel. So the Tuesday night college football playoff ranking show at 8, I will be there for. So just a heads up on that. But I just wanted to let all y'all know our schedule is going to be a little different this week. I will go live tomorrow at 1. Tuesday and Wednesday is a little bit up in the air as far as what time and those type of things. But I just wanted to give you guys a quick heads up on that our schedule is going to be a little bit different this week. And then, of course, we won't have a live show on Thursday because it's Thanksgiving.
Yep. Right on. So everybody, make sure you hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. And, of course, jump on the boards.irishbreakdown.com. There's going to be all kinds of good stuff there. Appreciate you guys hanging out with us tonight on our normal Sunday evening look back. It's now officially time to turn the page to USC and one of the greatest rivalries of all time, with all due respect, Archer. This is the one I look forward to.
The greatest intersectional rivalry.
There it is. The greatest intersectional rivalry of all time. So looking forward to it. Always love a little USC Notre Dame battle. And look, this one just means a ton for Notre Dame. If they can go take care of business, then this is going to be a fun December and potentially January. So very much looking forward to it. So for Bryan, I'm Vince, and we will talk to you next time on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Have a great night, everybody.